Today we're going to deconstruct the systematic genius behind a true literary giant, Maya Angelou. We're not just going to talk about her incredible books. We're going to look under the hood at the powerful operating system she created, a philosophy for taking the deepest, most personal pain and transforming it into something universal, something liberating. Let's dive in.
Okay, picture this. The year is 1969. Maya Angelou, who was born Marguerite Annie Johnson, has already lived what feels like a dozen different lives. She's survived a childhood filled with profound trauma. She's navigated long stretches of personal instability. And she's built this incredible, if a bit chaotic, career as a singer, a dancer, and a civil rights organizer. And then one day, her good friend, the writer James Baldwin, and an editor named Robert Loomis come to her with a proposition. They want her to write an autobiography.
Now, this wasn't just a simple request. It was a monumental challenge. It posed a question that I think would stop any of us in our tracks. How do you even begin to tell a story you've spent your entire life trying to forget? Right? How do you go back to those places of deep pain, not as a victim, but as the one in charge of the narrative? Her first reaction? Absolutely not. She refused. She just didn't believe that literature, that words on a page, could ever truly capture the raw truth of what she'd been through. But, Baldwin and Loomis were pretty clever. They knew her well. So they basically tricked her into it. They challenged her, suggesting that maybe writing an autobiography as literature was just too difficult, a feat she wasn't quite up for. Well, that little spark of pride was all it took. She accepted, and that moment was her call to adventure. It was the moment she realized that real freedom, real liberation, wasn't about running from her past. No, it was about methodically confronting it, processing it, and building a structure around it. And that commitment, that idea, would become her life's defining philosophy, the Angelou Principle. So, to really get to the bottom of her genius, we're going to follow her path through 6 key stages. We'll start with that initial call to remember. Then we'll see how her entire philosophy was forged in silence. We'll define exactly what the Angelou Principle is, uncover her incredible system for courage, watch her become a voice for the world, and finally, we'll land on this powerful takeaway: your story is liberation. So let's start right there, at that pivotal moment, the call to remember. You gotta understand, this was way more than just a book deal. This was a demand for a kind of radical honesty that most of us shy away from. It was a challenge for Angelou to finally stop running from the ghosts of her past, to turn around, look them straight in the eye, and document exactly what she saw with absolute precision. So you might be wondering, what made her the person who could actually do this? Why was she so uniquely equipped for such a heavy task? Well, to get that, we have to rewind. We have to see how her entire way of thinking was forged in the fire of her early life. That's where this need for a structured, systematic approach to her own history became, well, an absolute necessity for survival. When she was just 8 years old, after a deeply traumatic event, Maya Angelou stopped speaking. For 5 years, she chose to be silent, becoming what's known as an elective mute. But here's the thing about that silence: it wasn't empty. Far from it. It was incredibly formative. It forced her to do nothing but listen and observe the world around her. And in that silence, she developed this deep, almost sacred respect for the power of words, for their precision. She learned that language wasn't just for talking. It was a tool for creation, for survival, and ultimately for healing.
And the life that came after that silence, it was anything but simple or stable. I mean, just look at this trajectory. We're talking about being the very first Black female streetcar conductor in San Francisco, then a nightclub singer, then a dancer touring Europe, and then an organizer working right alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the civil rights movement. That constant chaos, that instability, it wasn't a bug, it was a feature. It forced her to become a master observer of people, of human nature in all its forms. She saw it all: the pain, the joy, the resilience, the injustice, from a dozen different angles. So all of those fractured, chaotic pieces of her past, they weren't a liability, they were her training ground. That's what taught her that the only way to make sense of all those fragments was to build a system. She learned how to methodically take the raw data of her life, all the pain, the silence, the constant change, and convert it into a carefully structured, coherent story that anyone could connect with. She figured out how to turn her personal shame into a source of collective strength. And this, right here, brings us to the very heart of it all, the Angelou Principle. You see, this wasn't just her writing style. It was a full-blown intellectual framework. It was a philosophy of transformation that was born directly out of all those early struggles. So let's put a formal definition on it. The Angelou Principle is this. It's the systematic belief that your personal pain can be transformed into a universal purpose. And how do you do it? Well, she had 3 key ingredients. First, unflinching memory. You can't hide from any of it. Second, linguistic mastery, using the power of precise language she learned in her 5 years of silence. And third, disciplined structure, the framework she had to build just to contain all that chaos.
Now, the foundation of this whole principle is an idea you might have heard before. The personal is always political. But for Angelou, this wasn't just a slogan. It was everything. For her, telling her story wasn't some act of ego. It was an act of social testimony, a political act. She understood that by documenting her own vulnerability, her own survival, she was giving a voice to millions of others whose stories had been intentionally silenced. Her pain wasn't just her pain. It was a mirror reflecting a huge, collective experience. And she put this philosophy into practice with 3 very clear pillars. First up was the Unflinching Testimony Mandate. This was her golden rule: absolute, memory-driven honesty. No making things up, no softening the hard parts to make people more comfortable. Second was the Poetic Rhythmic Protocol. She used the rhythm of poetry, the music she knew from growing up, to give her writing this incredible, accessible authority. And third, there was the Survival as Universal Purpose Doctrine. This was all about framing her own story not as some tragedy, but as a blueprint, a roadmap for hope and resilience that anyone could use.
Okay, so we have the philosophy, that's the what. But how did she actually do it? I mean, how do you sit down in a room day after day and stare that kind of pain in the face with that much discipline? This is where we get to the how. This is her system for courage, the actual actionable habits that turned her big ideas into world-changing literature.
Think about it like this. On one side, you have the total chaos of daily life, right? All the distractions, the responsibilities, our natural tendency to avoid difficult emotions. And on the other side, you have the system she built to fight back, the discipline of the retreat. For her, this wasn't just a nice-to-have, it was a flat-out necessity. She had to build a fortress against the outside world to do the dangerous, vital work of remembering.
And here's what that protocol actually looked like. It was a ritual. Step 1. She'd go and check into a completely sterile, anonymous hotel room in her town. No personal photos, no decorations, nothing to remind her of home. Step 2. She'd arm herself with only her essential tools: a simple legal pad, a dictionary, a thesaurus, and a bottle of sherry. Step 3. She would write, with intense, unbroken focus, from early morning until about 2 in the afternoon. And finally, Step 4, and this is so important, she would leave the work behind. She'd literally get up, walk out, and never edit that day. She'd go home, cook dinner, and let her mind rest, never bringing the trauma of the day's work back into her sanctuary.
Her other key habit was something we can call the oral tradition and performance audit. After she'd written the pages, she would test them by reading them aloud. This was her quality control. She was listening for the rhythm, the cadence, the emotional music that she knew from poetry and from church spirituals. And if a word or a sentence didn't sound right, if it didn't carry the exact emotional weight it needed to, it got cut. Simple as that. This system is why her writing isn't just something you read, it's something you feel.
It was through this incredibly disciplined system that she produced I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, a book that, and this is no exaggeration, changed everything. And that brings us to her incredible legacy, her transformation from a writer into nothing less than a global moral force.
I mean, this is the ultimate arc of her journey, isn't it? She took herself from being a survivor of unbelievable trauma and instability and transformed into this towering moral and literary figure for the entire world. And the absolute pinnacle of that journey had to be the moment she stood before the world and delivered her poem On the Pulse of Morning at President Bill Clinton's inauguration. She had taken her most private pain and, using her system, turned it into a source of public, national, and even global healing.
Her legacy is just so profound. She completely transformed the idea of an autobiography from just recounting a life to being this powerful tool for social justice. She basically institutionalized the idea that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's a source of incredible strength. She proved that systematic memory, paired with masterful language, is one of the most powerful tools there is for influencing culture. And maybe most importantly, she redefined courage, not as one big heroic act, but as the quiet, consistent, daily discipline of being honest.
So, after all that, what does this actually mean for us right now? Let's bring this all home. This brings us to our final and most important section, translating Maya Angelou's life's work into a lesson that we can all use today. What's the big takeaway? Well, here it is. This is the profound lesson at the core of the Angelou Principle. Your greatest vulnerability,
that thing you're most ashamed of, that story you've maybe spent a lifetime trying to bury, that is your greatest asset. It is the raw material for your most powerful, your most authentic, and your most deeply resonant story.
The invitation here is for each of us to commit to our own version of her unflinching testimony mandate, to finally confront our difficult pasts and to articulate our own truths without trying to soften them. It's a call to action. It's about learning to see our scars not as damage, but as strategy, the blueprint for a story that can not only heal ourselves, but maybe, just maybe, offer a little hope to someone else.
In the end, Maya Angelou built an entire legacy on one profound truth, that real courage is just the consistency of honesty. The Angelou Principle gave us a systematic blueprint to transform our deepest pain into a shared purpose, all through memory, structure, and language. Her life leaves us with one powerful, immutable rule to live by: the courage to tell your story is the ultimate act of liberation.